Welcome back to the IntentionALL podcast. We are very excited for today's episode. I have a mentor of mine joining us. His name is Scott Florida. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, man. Glad to be here.
Excited to have you. So I'll give a quick intro and then we're going to dive right into things today. Scott Florida is the founder of Common Grace Capital. He's a 30-year veteran in real estate investing and pastoral ministry. He's deeply passionate about helping people succeed in faith, family, and finances. In 2020, Scott and his wife Lori founded Common Grace Capital. It's a real estate syndication company, and it's designed to create reliable, multiple sources of income for ministry workers. And by leveraging his extensive experience and deep industry connections, Scott empowers others to build sustainable financial freedom. He is dedicated to family, and he is a father of 8 and a grandfather of 9. I love reading those words. And he is living with his family near Grand Rapids, Michigan. So that is a quick intro on Scott Florida. We're going to dive deeper. Again, thanks for joining us today.
Man, thanks for having me. I love what you guys are doing. It's just awesome.
Absolutely.
Good stuff.
And as I was preparing for this, it was so cool for me to reflect on the fact that I'm back in Michigan, moved back from Tennessee. But prior to my time in Tennessee, I was in a discipleship group that you were leading. So it's just been really cool to see full circle where life brings you. And I'm so glad to be reconnecting with you today.
Yeah, man. And even watching your growth from that discipleship time to now, I mean, that was kind of like just getting out of high school, starting to look ahead. And then, man, it just seems like you just hit the trail running, for these last 5-6 years. And it's been a real cool thing to watch. So you're killing it, man.
It's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, let's dive into the story. Go as far back as you'd like. What shaped Scott Florida into who he is today? We want to start early on and then work to where you're at today.
Wow. Okay. So, I think part of it probably would be starting all the way back to call to ministry. Like I mentioned, you mentioned in the intro there, 30 years in pastoral ministry. That wasn't like something I grew up in. I didn't come from a family that was in ministry. And so it felt like a unique call on my life that I sensed that God wanted me to go do ministry. So when that happened, I remember struggling with this question of, God, I really want to do ministry, but how am I going to take care of my family? Because I've heard that pastors don't do real well when it comes to the financial end, And so that was a wrestle point with God at that moment. And when that happened, I had a specific conversation with my youth pastor at the time who had encouraged me and said, I think you should think about ministry. And I told him what I was struggling with. And he's like, well, Scott, if God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, which Scripture says He does, and if you had a need at a given moment, do you think that it would be a big deal for Him to give you a cow, to meet whatever that need was? And I was a teenager, I was like 14, 15 years old, but at the same time, I'm looking at that going, I'm sure He would. And that was kind of like, okay, that's the hurdle I had to cross at that moment. And so from that moment on, it was kind of pretty clear I'd just moving towards ministry. And, went off to Bible college. Lori and I got married, and we had, kids coming. And so life was coming at us pretty fast. God provided for us a house. This was a crazy story, but we were at a church and, making less than $20,000 a year, which wasn't a lot even back then, and trying to figure out how to make it, and we ran into this situation where we were giving, and we brought some friends in to try to help us think through our budget because it was a struggle. And we didn't know what to do. And we also felt like we didn't want to, stop giving like we were. But interestingly enough, the mentors that we brought in looked at our whole budget and were like, I'm not sure if there's anything you can cut, but maybe you could reduce your giving a little bit. And so that was another inflection moment for us as a family and as a couple spiritually, like, okay, well, what are we going to do? Because we got to make this decision. And, I know it all comes from him. So I don't want to try to hold something back. But at the same time, we've got real bills to pay and a real family to support. And so what do we do? And so we decided that we were going to keep doing what we were doing, continue to give in spite of, which I would have considered that good mentoring because these were good people, godly people. So, and again, there's no expectations anybody else do it any other way. I don't think necessarily God has got something there that's a law so much as it is, guidance for us to put him in his proper place in our lives. And for us at that moment, we decided, that's how we're going to make that move. And, some interesting things happened. A guy reached out to our church and to the pastor at our church, and he had a house available and he was looking to sell it. And he was so kind and generous, and asked us what we thought we could afford to pay. And I told him a number. I think it was like $250 a month, And he said, I'll sell it to you for that. And it was like, for us, it was like a dream house. It was this built in the 1800s. It had this, wood trim that was really thick, and it was a mess. Just needed a ton of work, which we loved, And so anyway, it was crazy. Like, here we are struggling, and yet God provided for us in a really significant way. And the interesting thing too was when we went to that church, we had about $3,000 into the bank, so it wasn't a lot of money, but it was something. And we kept giving, and that bank account was dwindling down, And then the Lord provided this house. So then when we sensed God calling us to this side of the state, which was, now almost 30 years ago, we had to sell the house. And the guy that sold it to me said, what are you going to do with the house? And I said, well, we're planning to sell it. And he said, well, what are you planning to sell it for? And I gave him the number. And he said, I'll buy it back from you for that. And so he had given us a 39-year land contract. Okay. And so we're paying this just $250 a month. And then we'd done some work on the house. And I told you we had like $3,000 in the bank. And this was only about 2.5 years later. And 2.5 years later, we walked away from the sale of that house with about $7,500. And so that money we had in the bank actually doubled by, from our perspective, trusting God, just taking the next step and trusting that he's going to figure it out for you when you're trusting him and you're doing the best you can. So that was like formational for us spiritually. It was a question mark in our relationship with God. Like, do you trust me? All right, I trust you. Let's see how this goes,
Yeah. During that season and making that decision, was there a specific, because obviously you'd gotten counsel to, hey, maybe you should evaluate your giving, maybe take a step back on that. And obviously you guys chose not to do that. Was there a specific conversation or reason that you guys chose to go that route?
Yeah, that's a good question. I honestly think it was more just driven by how I read the scriptures. And there were specific passages that just stuck in my head that were like, and it resulted in that question for me. Do you trust me? It's back to the cow. You know what I mean? Do you trust me? I got cows, right? So that was where we settled, was that, okay, we're going to trust him. And then we saw him do that. And so like, I challenge you to find an investment that'll double in 2 years. Right. So for us, that was crazy. And a huge blessing. So that was kind of like our first foray into real estate, if you will. a real asset.
Mm-hmm.
And we watched, God provide for us. So that was kind of step one, and then came over to this side of the state. And when we got here, we started looking for a place to live. The church had a parsonage for us, but the plan was for us to move out of that parsonage, find a place. And so we started looking, and man, the market, over here in the Grand Rapids area was hot at the time. This was 96, 97. And finding a place to live in a place that, one, kind of met the needs of our growing family. We had, 2 sons at the time, and trying to figure out, hey, how do we find a place where we can all fit, but then also that's in a neighborhood where we feel comfortable and feel like it's a good place to raise a family. And so about that time, a missionary from our church invited us over for dinner, and we're looking at all these houses and not finding anything that we feel comfortable with. And that missionary lives in a duplex that's on this really nice street, and he invites us in. We go and eat at their house, and we're like, this is so nice. It's nicer than any of the houses that I'm looking at, And he was like, yeah, and it's kind of cool. You got somebody living next door that's helping to pay the mortgage. And, boom, big light bulb comes on for us, like, hey, this could work. And, within a short period of time, a house came up for sale 1 block down from them.
Wow.
And it was just right in line with what we were looking for. It was 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. And it was like, okay, I think this might be the thing. And so that was how we got into real estate. That was 1997. That was our first real estate investment property, where we had renters. And so from that time forward, that's kind of been, we started to realize how this works. When you've got somebody that's there that you can care for. The lady that lived next to us in that duplex, she was a widow. And so she had a young daughter, and the 2 of them lived there. And for us, here we are moving in. And I don't think, honestly, over the period of time that we owned that property, I don't think we raised the rent on her at all. Like, it was just, she lived there. We were able to take care of her. She ran a business out of her home. She actually taught music. So she had like a baby grand piano in that duplex and would teach music and everything. And she's just an incredible lady. And we were able to take care of her. I took care of the lawn, took care of the snow plow, and any problem that she had. Of course, I was right there, so I could just run over and fix it. And so it just became this light bulb moment for us of, this can work. You can find good people to live in your homes. You can care for them. You can provide a service that's of value to them, and then everybody wins.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like the foundation, really, for us of the real estate world.
Love it. Wow. And what was the factor that brought you guys to West Michigan?
Yeah, so we actually had a consultant come into our church and suggested that you might not need 2 pastors. So and I was a youth pastor at the time. So it's kind of like, well, that's probably me. So, and it wasn't like a negative thing. The church had grown since, we had been there, and it was actually, the church was doing quite well, but it was kind of like, we got to figure out, do we need to build a building? Do we need to, and the church was just trying to sort out the strategy of what steps to take. So anyway, the next day, without sending out a resume, without, anything, I got a call from the pastor at Alpine here in town. And he said, hey, we've got a position. Are you interested in looking at it? And I was like, well, that's interesting timing. So that was the beginning of it. And, one thing led to another, and it just seemed like God was calling us over here. And so we came, and that was like I said, that was 1996. So, and we pastored, I was a youth pastor at that church for 27 and a half years. It's a great experience, and wonderful people, and a lot to be thankful for there. So
During that phase of your life, was business at the top of your mind, but just not really a focus at that time? Or was it Did you even think you would be in any kind of business in the future, or what did that look like at that time?
That's a good question, because at that moment, it was not on my radar at all. So what we did, we ended up, like, that was 97 when we bought that house. And then a couple years later, another nice unit on that same street came for sale. And so I talked to my parents a little bit about it, said, this looks like it could be a good thing. And so they were like, yeah, we would like to help with that. So they put together the down payment. We moved in to get the special rate for owner occupied, So we brought something to the table, and then we managed it and just split that property. So then we got a duplex now, and then we've got a shared duplex. And so at that moment, like, that was going to be this short spurt where we were going to live there just for a short period of time, because we were moving from a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom duplex into a 2-bedroom duplex. And just at about that time, we had 2 kids that came to us as a set of twins.
Wow.
So now we've got 4 kids in a 2-bedroom, and our 1 to 2 year plan of, kind of house hacking our way forward became like a 7-year plan. So we moved in 2000 and didn't leave that place until 2007. By then we had 5 kids.
Wow.
And so we're all kind of jammed into this house, which you think, oh my word, that must be so terrible, so cramped. But I can tell you, for our kids, those 5, they have very fond memories of that tiny living space. And it wasn't bad. I mean, but at the same time, when your kid starts asking, so we had the 5 of them were spread out. There was a bedroom downstairs, and then there was a kind of a large living area that was all finished. And so we had one of our kiddos was in a little corner in that room, kind of with a screen, that became the bedroom-ish. And then the others had their bed kind of in another corner of that, because it was L-shaped. And my kids, for Christmas, they're asking for a door to their bedroom. And so you start to realize, we probably got to do something, And so that was in 2007. That was kind of interesting too. You remember the market in 2007 was starting to turn, and what happened was we actually had a situation in our church where there was another parsonage. We had 2 parsonages at our churches. The one we tore down, built a gym, which was really cool. And then the other one, the other pastor that was living in that parsonage moved out. And so the parsonage was empty. And of course, we're living in this 2-bedroom, and one of the guys from our church was like, he had the idea of, well, maybe if you were interested, you could move into the parsonage, And for us, it was kind of like, that would be really helpful to kind of build up a down payment and get ready. And so again, all of these things are little aspects of provision, that I look at as God's kindness to us, and just kind of encouragement towards that path of, you can trust me, you know. Well, about that time, 2007 to 2009, we lived in that parsonage. And of course that got our rentals all producing income, which was good. And, we were just paying a small amount, to the church for rent. And so all that, our cash flow situation changed pretty dramatically at that moment, and helped us to build up a down payment to buy a house. Well, 2009 was a pretty good time to be looking for a house. And so we ended up with a really nice home that was a foreclosure, 5 bedrooms, so crazy big and of course at that time, by then we had added another child, so it was 6 kids. So, we're in 5 bedrooms, there's 8 of us total. And so, nobody needs their own room. So it's probably time to add a couple more kids. So, got open the door, and we ended up adopting 2 kiddos from Ethiopia at that time. They were teenagers when they came to us. And that was another part of that moment of like, okay, this is a big step, adoption is a whole nother world of, how to bring people into your family. And it's very different, and the cost is significant. And so, here we are with 6 kids on a youth pastor salary. How are we going to do this? And so it was another moment of, okay, Lord, we're trusting you. And there's all kinds of stories too that we can tell you about how there were times where, there's one time in particular where I was asking Lori, my wife, she said, hey, how are we doing? What is our need right now? The next step for the adoption, like, what do we need? And she said, wait, we need $600. That's our next thing. And I'm like, perfect. Because that was in like winter. So like after Christmas, like probably February, something like that. The previous fall leading up to Christmas, I had tried to sell this 4-wheeler that we had. We weren't supposed to drive it in the neighborhood and all that kind of stuff. So we were like, well, we better sell it. So I'm thinking before Christmas is perfect time to sell it. So I was getting ready, tried to sell it. Nobody looked at it, no bites, no nothing. So for whatever reason, we get into February, right? And I'm thinking, nobody's going to be interested in this thing. I put it out and almost immediately it sold. And it was the same. I had the $600 in my pocket from the sale of that 4-wheeler when I asked Lori, hey, what do we need next? And she said $600. And so it's like, okay. And again, it's moments like that where, because it's interesting to me when I look at the Bible and look at different passages of Scripture, there's all kinds of places where people trusted God for something when they didn't know what the outcome was going to be. One of the passages that always resonates in my head is the story of Jonathan, his armor bearer. And he says to him, the armor bearer says, I'm with you heart and soul. And he says to him, who knows, God can deliver by many or by few. And he may deliver for us. So let's go take a shot at it, and then they take this risk and they kind of throw out this fleece, if you will, to God. Hey, if we go up and they don't even necessarily throw it out to God per se, that they just have the conversation with themselves. If this happens this way, we will look at that as God's direction. And so they step into that moment of literally putting their lives on the line for something they believe God called them to do. And, God brings a great victory and delivers. But they just didn't know that at the time when they took the risk. And so I think that there's that piece of, and by the way, we could talk for quite a while about risk and the significance of risk in ministry, but also in business. The more that I've kind of turned into this new business world, that's become just a recycling thought in my head about the risk. Okay. Because you're always evaluating risk in business and what the risks are. But that's another point of discussion we could have. But in the end, I think there's a place in which each, there's that passage in Habakkuk where he says, the just shall live by faith. And that's what we're called to do. We're and there's the passage, I think it's in Romans, he talks about from faith to faith. And I always have it in my head as this kind of this stair step, like, okay, I'm trusting God for this one. And a lot of times it's a small thing. And then you're like, okay, now I'm going to trust God for this one. And then for this one. And, like David, he's taking care of the sheep and there's a lion and a bear. And then there's Goliath, right? There's this graduated steps of faith that he's been, and there was probably the snake, and the fox or the coyote before that,
his brothers.
Yeah, his brothers. Yeah. Right. There's them too. Right. And so, I think that there's something to be said there too, for us to just be recognizing that when we have those opportunities to test our faith and our abilities, because both are involved, that we take those opportunities to take a step of faith. So I as far as our story goes, like that next phase of our lives was, okay, now we've got a family of 10 and feed, clothe, healthcare, provide for. And it was somewhere in there about 2017, where I was like, God, you said you're going to take care of us, and it is tight. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And at that time, I happened to be reading, just for me, my Bible study has been real simple. Like start in Genesis, read to Revelation, start over, right? It's real simple stuff. So, but I've also found that God has directed us in some significant ways through that. And, I was in the book of Genesis and just happened to be in the passage where Jacob's wrestling with God and saying, you said you were going to take care of me. Now my brother wants to kill me and I'm right here at the river. What? I'm not letting go till you bless me, And so it was kind of like that. I was in that moment where I was just like, Lord, I need you to show up here. I don't know what else to do, but just hold on, And then just kind of kept reading. And the next section, you move from Jacob to his sons, and it's Joseph. And here's Joseph, who's, this supreme manager and business guy who just knows how to, produce and to protect and to, measure risk and to deal with it and to just I just see this Joseph as he's figured it out. And so, okay, that's the kind of the guy that I want to be. And then you get to the end of Genesis and you move into the story of Moses, right? So Moses is the next guy up. And Moses is like, I'm scared. He could burning bush. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I don't want to do this. I'm afraid. And God tells him, he says, what do you got in your hand? Right. And it's like, it's a stick. And then he says, well, throw it on the ground. It turns into a snake. And then he says, pick it up by the tail. Like, that's not how you pick up a snake. But he's like, trust me, And so he picks a snake up by the tail. It becomes a rod again. But in that moment, I'm saying to God, what do I do? Like, where do I go? And I just felt like a little gentle poke in the chest of, what do you got in your hand? And I had the rental properties and the real estate. And that was what that was the first thing that came to my head when I felt like God was asking me that question. So real estate. So I said, okay, figure it out, And it wasn't this, I'm going to rain manna down. It was, I'm going to, tell you, this is the step to take, move in that direction, start doing that. And so that was the moment, 2017, when we began to be like, okay, Lord, well, what do we need to do? And I just started learning. I'm a firm believer that, and scripture affirms this, right? In Proverbs, where he says, get wisdom, get knowledge, get understanding. If it costs you all you have, And so like that became the focus. Like, how do we learn everything that we need to learn? And at the moment, it was podcasts. Like, okay, how do we learn and how do we get our heads around this? And so it became podcasts. And I had, honestly, I don't think at that moment, this is 2017. I mean, podcasts had been out for a while, but I don't know that I'd ever really listened to one at that moment. But that changed, and it became literally hundreds of hours of, I'm mowing the lawn, I'm driving in the car. I'm like, every little moment I could capture became, okay, how do I learn what I need to learn to figure this out?
Yeah.
Because I knew enough to know that it worked from our experience. I mean, we've been landlords then for 20 years at that moment. So we understood a little bit about it. And again, that was like one of these moments too, where when God says, what do you have in your hand? And, I'm like, okay, it must be the real estate. And, then we start realizing you've been building equity for a while in now 3 properties.
Yeah.
And I didn't see it. Like, I honestly, I knew so little, even though we'd been doing it, I knew so little about the financial side of it and how money works and all of that I didn't really realize what we had. And so that became a moment of like, okay, now we're learning and realizing we have real assets here and they've been growing, and that's been good. So that was kind of like a big inflection point again, where 2017 comes along, figure it out, and then we start learning and realizing we need mentors, We need people to kind of guide us. And that had always been something that had been important to me. I knew, I didn't know a lot. And so I was always looking for a way. I remember listening to a John Maxwell cassette tape back in the 90s, right after started in ministry. And he would say, listen, just about anybody that you want to learn from, if you go to them and say, hey, can I pay you $100 and buy you lunch? Would you be willing to sit down with me for an hour and just, offer wisdom? And most of the time, they wouldn't take your $100, but they would gladly give you their wisdom. And so that's I think a key factor. Again, I know you want to talk about that, but the mentoring side became really central. And especially as we were considering moving into trying to help other people, we felt like we got to get this right. So the mentoring side became really important.
Before expanding on the mentoring side of things, I think it's very special and beautiful how, in a way, the fact that you didn't even realize what you had in the rental properties was a testament to your journey being simple obedience to God without even fully like seeing the end result like you were talking about. That's just something that sticks out to me, is how every step of the way, number one, your motive wasn't like, how can I make as much money as possible just so I can have more things? No, it was more so out of like, okay, Lord, this is what you've called me to be and do. And how can I honor you and actually, fulfill this? And every step was just a simple act of obedience that required faith and risk. And regardless of you not seeing the full end result, like, it got you to where you're at today. And I think it's so cool how there was a point where like you didn't even fully realize what the Lord was building up and what you had, which, yeah, that just, I think is so beautiful.
And thanks, man. And that is really true. Like, we didn't have a clue until we got to that moment where we're just like, what do we do? Like, how do we figure this out? And just that it was a voice from the outside, and, I shout out to the real estate guys, Robert Helms and Russell Gray, because I started like binging on their podcast, went back years, listened to, the archives of it, but really began to understand real estate investing with their mentoring and tutoring. And that was like the education that God used to kind of help me see what he had been doing in the background, despite, my lack of understanding that it was happening, So, yeah, I mean, it really was a surprise for us to realize, oh, that really is something special.
Yeah.
So super encouraging. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And I think that's one of those things where we don't always see what he's doing and what he's building behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But he's faithful.
Amen.
He is indeed. I'd love to ask a question on the personal side, and the reason being is I'm engaged, going to be married this summer. These two guys are married.
Yeah.
So just for us, like, being a pastor is a full-time job in itself. You are also a landlord on the side for long term. So I'd love to hear any insight, wisdom for guys that are in the business realm, like in terms of schedule, like pastoring and I would say entrepreneurship are very similar on the scheduling side. Like, if someone needs you, you kind of got to go. You got to take the call. So would just love to hear wisdom on how you've navigated that.
Yeah.
Lessons learned.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. And I think it's the one that we all wrestle with, right? How do we balance, and it's a variety of things. You're trying to figure out, and again, some people don't even like the word balance, but I think it has to be to some degree a balance, because you have these competing sometimes demands that need you. I think it was Andy Stanley that wrote a book, and the original publication, I think the name has changed now, but it was Choosing to Cheat. It was the name of the book. And the idea was that in life, you're juggling these balls, right? And some of them are rubber and some of them are glass. And you can't drop the ones that are made of glass. Otherwise, but the rubber ones will bounce back. And things like your job and your work, are more rubber. Like, if you mess up, well, what do I got to do next? How do I fix this? What do we go forward? But in your marriage and with your kids, you don't have as much room there, to get it wrong, and particularly over a long period of time, right? We're talking about. I'm not saying, and we wouldn't say that you don't have those periods where you have to push, But I think also there's an aspect in which you have to have in mind as much as possible to involve your family in what you're doing. Blue Bloods is a TV show, and they kind of talk about the family business, because everybody in that, series is kind of involved in their business. And so we used to talk about that with our family. This is our family business. And so we would talk about that with ministry. And so, kids would be there helping me turn off lights and clean up and all of that stuff from the activities we were doing. But then again, they're all up with me on the roof of that duplex, putting a roof on the duplex, And so I think and for Lori and I, we did so much of that together. And again, not every couple's built that way and shares those same things. And so you gotta kind of work those things out. But I think that there is a measure in which when you can involve each other and your kids in what you're doing and kind of help them to see it, from the front end. This is how business works. This is how life works. We do this stuff together. We're a family. You can create some interesting opportunities. One of our, in the world that I'm in now is real estate syndication, right? And I should say real asset syndication, because we do real estate, but we do other things as well. And essentially what we're doing is we're bringing capital together, and then we manage the deal and then help other people invest in those projects passively, so they get some of the same benefits, all the same benefits of being the active investor, but they can do it passively. Our first syndication was a dog that our kids invested in. And so each of the kids put some money in, and we went out and bought a dog. Well, that dog had puppies. Well, when you sold the puppies, then each of the kids had a certain equity position in the dog, and so benefited from that. But there was also work in the dog management, property management world that needed to get paid as well. And so, the proceeds that came from the sale of the dog had to first pay for the care of the managers, which is the kids. They all got a certain chunk that way, but then also from the sale of the dog. And so I think, to the question of how do you do this, I think you try to, as best you can, you do it together. And it opens a lot of doors, and it's not always easy, but that's a key piece of the puzzle. I think also it's just remembering that you've got to prioritize that family because it's a short window. One of the other ways to think about it is probably anybody can do your job. Not necessarily anybody, but somebody can replace you in your job. But you will be the only dad. You'll be the only husband. And so that's the role you have to fill. Nobody else can do that. And this goes back to, one of the passages of scripture where in Ephesians 2:10, he talks about how we're his workmanship, created for good works that God has prepared ahead of time for us to do. And so there's some of those that he's only prepared you for. Nobody else has been prepared for that task. And so for what that's worth, those are some thoughts along the parenting line and the husbanding line.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite the busy time there.
Yes.
Raising kids, you've got 10 at home, you're managing properties, you're managing a family, a marriage.
Yeah.
How'd you do it? What kept you through?
Well, again, so there was a book that came out somewhere along those lines by Stephen Covey. He wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but he also wrote another book called First Things First. And there is a place in which, and we always have to do this, which is you have to triage your situation and prioritize what number one is. This is the first problem that I have to deal with, and the first thing that needs to be solved. And again, there's that whole discussion of urgent and important, and making sure that you don't let the tyranny of the urgent wipe out what's important, right? And so there's a few things that, again, only you can be responsible for and only you can do. One of the first things that I think we all have to think about is our health. Nobody can be healthy for you. Nobody can go out and exercise, get the right amount of sleep, eat right, all that kind of stuff. You have to be the one who makes that happen. And in a sense, everything else is dependent on the health of that body.
Yeah.
So it's what carries around your brain. It's what, gives you that strength to work and the capacity to play and all of those things. And so that needs to be a priority. You got to figure that out. Your walk with God, And again, I said the health first because your ability to read and pray are in part dependent on your body's ability to work and be able to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. And then, of course, you've got your family that nobody else can be priority for. And so, you're sorting those as, okay, these got to be done. And then you're also saying, okay, well, now I've got these people that I love, that I'm called to shepherd and care for. And then I've got this business piece, and so sometimes it's like, I can't budget enough time to solve for that. And so what you hope is that you've got enough cash then to solve for it, right? Yeah. Can I pay somebody else to do it? And when you've got that starting to dial in, you can say, okay, that's what we need to do. We need to spend some cash on that. And that's what would happen. Like, we'd get a call on the duplex. There'd be an issue or something. And the first question was, is it an immediate need? Because sometimes they would be immediate needs. And I think the best thing that we can do is just solve as quickly as possible, because you're taking care of people. You're providing a service. And so you want that done as quickly as possible. But for us at that time, it was like, if it was an outlet that wasn't working, or if it was, something minor, then, hey, we'll talk with you on the weekend. And, but if it was something that had to be done immediately, water's running in, or there's a leaky, toilet or whatever, that had to be solved immediately. And so you had to call somebody in to do that. So, it's imperfect, and I don't think you ever get it right 100% of the time. But again, I think there is a sense in which, baseball, for an example, you're hitting 300, 400, something like that. You're a really good ball player. Well, you're striking out or getting out 60% of the time, right? So, I think that there is that balance of, and again, you can't use that measurement in family, I don't think, but I think there is that sense in which you're just aware. I'm not going to get it right every time, but I'm always going to come back to my grid and my focus and my priorities, and making sure, okay, that I'm still, pouring into these people. And I'm creating the capacity to pour into them by how I'm taking care of myself and my world. So,
yeah, that was super helpful. That was a great holistic view at the concept of stewardship, balancing those things well. But love the glass and the rubber comparison. We have weekly accountability. For us, we're tracking different things, different priorities for each of us, and just having that visual of the rubber and the glass. There's some things that you can't change. Like, you need to be there for those. Some of the other things are priorities, but these take precedence over these.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. I think one of the things I at the moment when I heard that too, was that clarity of, yeah, I don't want to drop that ball.
Yeah.
But if I do, and if I have to, we'll just figure it out. That rubber one, we'll go find it, get it cleaned up and try to get back at it,
Yeah. I also love how you mentioned the reality of trying to integrate your family to do things together.
Yeah.
Because there's
Yeah.
not so much of a need to balance or compartmentalize everything when you're just doing everything together. It becomes a lot easier maybe not easier, but doable. So I love that.
Yeah, and I think, like to your point, I think that what it does is it takes a little bit of that pressure off, because if you're out there, like I have one memory of one of my sons coming with me because a basement flooded, and so and we're running shop vacs in the basement of the house at like 12 at night, whatever, and just trying to figure it out. I have another memory of my daughter coming with me to paint this duplex, and we were there till 4 a.m. getting it done, and I got a picture of her. She had written her name on the wall and then was sleeping on the floor in front of that wall. But like, man, we did something. We made a memory, and it's a physical, tangible. We will never forget that. And that roof, I mean, there was all kinds of things that happened with that roof. I mean, there was a bee's nest that, a couple of my kids got stung because it was in the ground. Like, oh no, and then we're up on the roof and all of a sudden it starts raining while we're on the roof. All the tools are out, everything. We got to get off without, and first of all, we have to get it dry, right? You got to get that tar paper down or something. Then you got to get off the roof and we have these memories of these things we did together that are in the real world, right? And that just cemented some of the joy, of being family. And, the memories are good and bad, right? But they're, I say bad, but they're like, you can look back and laugh now. Right?
Yeah.
But we shared those. And that's a big piece of the puzzle too. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think I'm still thinking about the rubber, but being willing to let that maybe sink a little bit, I think goes back to what you were talking about with Jonathan and his bear, where they had that activity, but they also had that trust, and even being willing to let go of something that's not necessarily it's a priority, but it is not essential, is kind of that trust theme I've seen in your whole story of, I want to accomplish this thing, but God, I'm doing the things that you've called me to essentially first. I'm trusting you with this. I'm still going to give it the best effort I can. And I've just seen that theme in your story of that trust and provision.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about the financial piece being a rubber ball, but to a degree it is. And certainly in our case, I kind of wish I'd have been more focused on it just so that I could see it and I knew that I was being a good steward of it. But I do see, like, looking back, oof, you took care of me on that one, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really good. Well, we can continue on the journey. Diving into, I know you mentioned the real estate guys, so we can kind of dive a little bit deeper. You were looking for mentors. You're doing this exploration through the podcast, learning a lot, and it sounds like there was a key unlock on the financial side. Like something clicked there. I don't know what that was, but let's continue on that.
So one of the things that happened was in 2017, like I said, there was that, hey, so you got to do something. You got to figure this out. I started listening to the real estate guys, and one of the things that I had heard about was, Robert would say, life's too short to be a property manager or to property manage, and I was like, what? How do you do that? How do you, and so this was how do I do it? Well, the other thing that was happening at that time was, I've got these kiddos at home, and I know I've got a limited window because they came to us as like freshmen in high school. And so then they don't know the language, and this is in a primarily white community, and so like they're from Ethiopia, so it's like there's going to be some hurdles there for sure, and so we've got to kind of figure this all out. Well, I can't be spending a lot of time, as much as we do that kind of stuff together, at the same time, I need some more freedom to be present, because I've got to make up for, 14 years of not being present. So how do I do that? And at the time, I was managing those 2 duplexes plus the missionary that I met, so I was managing his at that time too. And so he and I talked, and I was just telling him, I think I need to find a property manager. And so I started looking, and then realized your dad was a buddy of mine, also a youth pastor before, but had gone into real estate. And I reached out to him and was like, hey, I don't know if you'd be interested. Would you take a look at this? And I mean, that was a really huge moment for us, because you can only scale when you're doing all the work yourself. You can only scale a certain amount. But when you start to bring other people on, then you can multiply, your effectiveness. And, he was an incredible property manager. Like literally to this day, one of the best I've ever worked with. We would have turnovers in which there would be no vacancy days. Like the guy would move out, it'd be clean that night, and the next morning, the next guy would move in. I mean, just ridiculously effective at property management. And that was a moment, though. Like, if I don't have to manage it all, and again, like, it gave me back my time, it gave me back, my mind, because it wasn't racing through all of these things. But it also taught me that a good property manager is going to be better than I am at property managing. So all of a sudden rents start ticking up. My residents had problems solved immediately. It wasn't wait until the weekend type stuff. And so I started to see these changes. Of course there were lessons too, which is two words that you need to learn early and not let get out of your mind: deferred maintenance. I, realized I had a lot of deferred maintenance. Literally all the furnaces in all 6 of those units on that street went out the same year. And so like, that's kind of not good for cash flow.
Yeah.
So we had to figure that one out, but we did. But again, the increases in the rents and the development of the property itself through Matt's management changed the game for us to where we started to see significant progress and growth. So but that was a moment. So and again, the real estate guys were a part of that, because you start to learn not everybody does it the way you're doing it, and so you kind of get your mind bent a little bit off of what you've had it on. And so then we started learning about equity and how equity builds in real estate over time, and how you can actually move some of that equity from one property to another. So now, instead of just one property that's slowly increasing in value and having the mortgage paid down, you have 2 that are functioning and doing that same thing. And so it's almost like you're planting a fruit tree, and this fruit tree is now growing. Well, now you take some of the seeds from that, you plant here, and that fruit tree starts to grow. And you start to see there's a pattern here. If we can move this forward, then it begins to multiply. And so, again, I started to realize, hey, that's what's happening. And then it was like, okay, so how do we... I think the thing that caught me was I've got all these friends in youth ministry and missionaries and others that are struggling financially. And particularly over a period of time, as a youth pastor, you see kids go out into ministry. They go out and be missionaries, and then they got to raise the money to go be missionaries. And it's a brutal thing. Like, I mean, they're just grinding and grinding and grinding. So, not everybody's that way, but most are, where it is a hard, hard process. And I'm realizing, you know what? This real estate, some of these guys are bringing a church on for $100, $200 a month. And a property can provide that. And not only could it provide that, but it will slowly, increase over time. Rents will tick up. The mortgage will pay down. You're going to get this significant benefit. And I'm like, I got to tell these people about this. This is working, And so we started to teach other people how to do it. And again, through the education of the real estate guys, connected with that brought connections to providers that we could work with. And we started to buy properties out of state and started to realize, that could work. Again, started teaching other people how to do it. And the mentors and the education that we got were really central to, finding the right path. And then taking those small steps in that direction, starting to, you test small, right? And then starting to see progress in those areas. So that was a big piece of the puzzle. Their education, their mentoring. It's good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Was there any other, because I'd love for you to share about joining their group, and was there other groups that you evaluated? Why did you choose to go through them? And obviously, I guess the alternative education route is probably a little bit under the radar for most people. So maybe describing that a little bit as well would be helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think you make a good point that it's the alternative education piece is under the radar. Unless you have been taught to look for that and to intentionally find mentors when you need something and to own the responsibility of your own education. And make the decision, okay, this is the direction I want to go, or I think God's leading me or whatever. Now, how do I get there? And who do I need? Right, there's that book, Who Not How, or The Power of Who. Both of those books are really good. But the idea of okay, I can't do this on my own. I need somebody. And so chasing that person is the path forward. So for us, again, realizing I think God may be moving us in the direction of educating and helping people to find these opportunities to invest in. We realized, okay, we've got our experience, 20 years as owning single family homes and managing property, but now we're going to manage other people's capital. That's a whole nother gig. So we've got to really make sure that we've got this figured out. So we were looking for people who had done that successfully. And as I'm listening to the real estate guys, they have this thing that they would teach about sometimes called syndication. They didn't talk about it a lot, but every once in a while they'd talk about it. And then they'd have this seminar, syndication, secrets of successful syndication. So COVID hit in 2020. I've been watching this seminar and thinking, this is so cool, but I don't have the money to go and leave and the time away and all of that. Well, then COVID, and we're sitting at home and they can't do in-person events. And so they're going to do a virtual webinar setting, which wasn't all that popular before then, but became this thing, since then. And the cost was significantly reduced. And the government had kindly sent us money, so we had a little capital to work with, and I didn't have to pay for a hotel and meals and all of that. And so I was like, okay, here we go. We're going to take this Secrets of Successful Syndication seminar. And I mean, I just mind blown, this is so crazy, all the different aspects of it. There's a lot to it, but when you get through all the hurdles, you can provide passive investments for people where you create those opportunities, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, and people can invest and experience all the benefits and utilize the benefit of your experience, your history, your relationships, your contacts, and we can leverage all of that for, some opportunities for people to invest. We can't remove all the risk, and I wouldn't want to. The reason why I wouldn't want to is because I think that's an area we all have to own, is that everything that we do has a measure of risk. And everything we don't do, right? If you don't do it, there's a measure of risk to that as well. And so we can't remove all that risk. What we can do is we can mitigate as much risk as possible. We talk about, in our space, we talk a lot about de-risking. Like how do you create what is often called a differentiated advantage? How do we do as much as we can to remove the downside risk and still be able to take advantage of the upside risk if it comes? And so when we can provide those kind of opportunities, we feel like, hey, that's a good, solid win for our investors. So when we started to realize, okay, this definitely is the path that we want to take, then they had this next tier of a mentoring club that you could join. So we go to the seminar, you kind of get your head around the big picture, but then if you really are serious about it and you want to do it, well, then it's another investment, capital and risk, right? That's going to happen. And so, that just seemed like a really good fit. I'd come to trust, their wisdom over that time. And so we dove in and joined that mentoring club for syndication and began to learn that way.
Awesome. I love to hear other people's journeys in that realm because that's been a big part of my story on the real estate side.
Yeah.
So you joined in 2020, 2026 today. I'd love to kind of hear just brief snapshot on that season since joining then. And then if you want to pick out a deal to give us some specifics on, because I know you've done a whole lot between syndication deals, 1031s, like you've done a lot. So I'd love for you to pick out one of those, share some of the details and why you did that.
Okay. So as we went along, learned all I can from the mentoring club, and then got our first deal under our belt. And it was one of those things where we had come to trust this particular property manager that I work with in Memphis, Tennessee. And so I felt super comfortable with them, and like I knew just how good they were. They were comparable to Matt, your dad. And so that was like, okay, these guys are good. And when I realized, hey, I've got to find a deal, the first thought in my head is, I know from my experience of 20 years, management is critical. If you mess up on the management side, it's going to cost you significantly. There's a phrase, I heard it from Kim Kiyosaki. She said, money follows management. And it's just really true. With good management, even in a subpar property, you can still do fine if you've got a good manager that knows how to take care of their residents and just, manage the property well. So I'm thinking, if I'm going to do this, I need a good property manager. So I reached out to him and said, I don't know if there's ever be a shot at you doing this. And he's like, well, that's not how I do it, but I do know this guy. He's got a portfolio of homes, and if you buy him, I'll manage him. And I was like, oh no, this is real. I gotta find investors. I gotta build out the legal, blah. So, and that was right at the beginning of that journey. And, then into the mentoring club, and then starting to figure that out. And long story short, that deal didn't work out. I didn't get my education enough in time. So I called back the seller that had that portfolio, and I said, hey, I'm ready to make you an offer on those properties. And he's like, Scott, I'm taking a cash offer tomorrow. Like, oh. But my dad has these 10 properties in Arizona, if you're interested. And so we ended up buying that portfolio, right? And doing it. So, but then again, as we're moving forward, in my head, I'm thinking, I got to get the education. And there was this brief window where the real estate guys merged their inner circle, which is a syndication group that they had, with Ken McElroy and his team, and they called it the collective inner circle.
He's a phenomenal operator.
Yeah, Ken. Yeah, it was unbelievable. Yeah, and also just a really generous educator too. And so that window was short. There was a reduced price. It was still a load for us, to figure out financially. But again, it was like, what am I doing? I need to get my head around this. And so we jumped in on that opportunity, which was a year of pretty intense mentorship and hanging around with some really high level guys that have a ton of experience and are open to having those discussions. What's going on? What are you facing? What are you and so you'd be on these calls and you'd be able to ask questions and you'd be able to put your deal or your opportunity in front of them and get feedback from them. And so that was the next phase of our journey, was building that out. And I think the biggest benefit for me from those events was, two things. One, laying the foundation so I understood what I was doing. But two, keeping me out of deals that were dumb deals, right? Like, I could tell you why I thought it was a great deal. And I would present that in, the holes they would blow in those deals were just, you drive a truck through them, but it was so good to be in a place where you had that opportunity to, be stretched and to be evaluated, and kind of also, I think too, for them to help me narrow my focus from, okay, broad strokes to, okay, this is really where your skill set is. And this is, where some of your strengths are, and, focus here. So that was very helpful. Mm-hmm. So that's been kind of the journey from 2020 till now. And so then we started, stacking deals and looking for opportunities. Again, the game that we're working towards is cash flow, trying to figure out a way to provide for our families in such a way that, we've got the cash flow that we need. This was something that I learned from Russ, who was one of, Russell Gray, but I always carried 2 quarters with me. And one of them is, 1972. And this one is from 1951. So about 20 years apart as far as coins go. And they don't look that different, right? You can hear they sound a little different. And that's because one of them is made of silver. So this one from 1972 will get you 25 cents worth of gas, right? This one, if you sold it, would get you 2 gallons of gas, because it's a real asset. And so one of the things that I learned in this process is, okay, inflation is coming and it's going to eat away at your investments. But when you have a real asset, like a property or an investment in, say, oil and gas, or, investment in a self-storage facility, you've got a real asset that inflation is going to benefit you owning that. And so it was things like that too that you began to learn in those mentoring sessions that help impact the way that you think going forward, regardless of what you get into. And that's why, again, I think there's why Scripture talks about that being the value is that education. Okay. And again, it's that education is a part of what makes the financial side a little bit more rubber, because you've learned it. And even if you mess it up, there's that. Okay. Now a friend of mine was telling me, the definition of fail is FAIL, first attempt in learning. Right. So if you've got that in your head, okay, this is it's win or learn. I'm going to figure this thing out, take a step. I may get it wrong, but I've learned something. You've got that mindset, and you've picked up some principles like this that just sit necessarily under the radar, under the surface of what's happening, but it may be sitting under the surface, but it's fertilizing the soil so that, as you have those opportunities, things begin to grow. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but there was a lot that we gained out of the mentoring experience that I think have formed and shaped, how we proceed.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that item that you touched on about shifting the way you think. Because we've interviewed a handful of guys, and some of them are in high tier, mid tier mentorships, and honestly, frankly, like some of them are paying a lot. And we've just asked their feedback. 'Cause I started a mastermind with these guys and trying to build that out well, do it intentionally. And some of the key features that some of those other guests have mentioned, it's not like just the information, but it's, okay, who are you surrounding yourself with? And is it changing the way you think? Are they holding you accountable to a certain standard? So it's cool to hear that and how the real estate guys have been that piece of the puzzle for you.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about that. So because that carries forward. Like there is for us anyway, we kind of reached a moment, and one of the phrases that you'll hear the Robert or Russ say is education for effective action. So this has to translate into you doing something with it. And I got to the place where I felt like I had the education, and I've got to work on the effective action. I've just got to, start taking steps, start making moves. And so at that moment, though, am I devoid of wisdom now? Well, I got this whole network of friends now. Because if you're in a mastermind, I would encourage you, don't waste the connections. I mean, one of the biggest benefits you're going to get out of that is the people that you meet. And again, there's going to be some that you don't click with, but there's going to be some that are like, oh, this is a person who has the same heart I do, the same passions I do, the same connections, the same desires, the same, goals for impact, and you're going to find some people that you really resonate with. And those people you have to put the work in to stay in touch with. And I would say that's another one of the huge benefits that I walked away with from those relationships. Some of the guys that I talk to almost weekly now have come out of those relationships and those connections and through those masterminds and the people that I met there. And just some unbelievable people that have a ton of wisdom to share. And we just kind of swap back and forth and encourage one another, on a regular basis. And so there is this sense in which the benefits of the mastermind have continued because of those existing relationships. And again, those guys that I was in the mastermind with, that were my mentors, I can still reach out to them, and I still talk to them on a pretty regular basis. And so it's really, I don't see that as like a one and done thing. That again goes back to that concept of like, it's a seed planted into the ground, and it's a opportunity or resource, nutrient you can draw from, as you're trying to build what you're building.
Absolutely. You can't put a dollar amount or a timeline really on the community aspect.
That's so true. That's so true. Because it pays dividends, continually going forward.
Yeah, it's really good.
How did you transition into other kinds of real assets other than real estate? What did that look like?
Well, first of all, I'll throw out a warning. That's tricky and dangerous. It's where a lot of guys get into trouble, is that transition from what they know, and they absolutely know, you know what I mean? Like you put your 1,000 hours or 10,000 hours into this, so you know this, but then you're moving into something else and you don't know intuitively the risks. You think you do, but you don't necessarily know the risks intuitively. And again, I think that that's where a lot of benefit can come from the mentors that are surrounding you. But also, this is the piece that falls into what we call due diligence. Like, how do you research people, and how do you find out what's their track record? What are they? So we're looking for, roughly three things. And again, these are things we've learned from our mentors, but you're looking for character. Like that's the number one thing, what kind of people are they? There's a passage where it's in Psalms where, a righteous man swears to his own hurt. In other words, when something goes sideways, they're going to own it and they're going to do everything that they can to rectify it and take responsibility for what happened. And so character becomes this massively important number one thing. And then the next question is competence, right? Do they have the ability to execute on the task that's in front of them? Like, for example, I'm in a project, it's an oil and gas project. And so I'm not an oil and gas guy, but if I'm ever going to do anything in that space, I'm going to be dependent. It's going to be the who, that's going to give me the opportunity to do that. And so, when we started to look at that space, I'm working with a buddy of mine. I didn't do that project by myself. I went with a partner, a guy who's got quite a bit of experience in that space. I have a little bit of experience in that space. And so, we kind of blended that together. But then we also did who are these people? How do we know them? What's their track record? And so there's the character there, is the competence there. And then the last one is what we would call commitment. Like, how have they managed headwinds? And, what do they do beyond that? So one of the guys that we work with, we're doing a project in Austin, Texas, where we're developing single family homes for sale. And the developer that we're working with, he had a project that he was working on in 2020. And he had opened in March of 2020 a Crunch Fitness, which is like a Planet Fitness place, in California in March of 2020. And you can imagine what that did to the deal.
Yeah.
And so how do you navigate that? Well, he moved all the equipment outside and was one of the only guys who was able to keep his gym open because he just figured out a path, And so, like, somebody's commitment to, okay, we don't know. We just don't know. That's, again, part of that risk. You're going to step into something and there's no way to predict the COVID, right? It's a black swan thing. But when I run into that, what am I going to do? And how am I going to respond? And, you figure out a way to do it. That's one of my friend's definitions of entrepreneurship is figure out a way. I've got my wife, Lori, she bought me a cup. It says it's figure outable, so we take your steps, figure it out. So
In your journey with your business since 2020, have you had any fail moments where you've had to figure it out?
Oh, yeah. So one in particular that actually we just resolved it, but we had a couple leads on flipping mobile homes. And it looked on paper like a can't lose deal, right? And so and again, this was an area I'm finding, again, you sometimes you kind of sort this out as you go forward. Yeah, I know you know this space well with the flipping thing, right? But we just didn't get it done in the way that it needed to be done in the time it needed to be done. And so it ended up, our investors, they were all made whole. Everybody got, what was promised to them, but we took a beating on both of those, and the bottom line was, I was in a space that I wasn't super comfortable with, so, full transparency, that was just too, in the timing was not good. Like we're doing a startup, right? So we need to be hitting on all cylinders, not time to be losing money. But that's where we were and that's what we did. And so again, it's one of those things where, for us, obviously got to pay your investors, got to get them what they need. You got to pay your guys that did the work. And so you got to find the way to find that capital to make that right, and then learn, make a path forward that, this is again, one of the guys that I met in that collective inner circle group. And he and I have been walking together over this last 2 years probably now. And, he's got his own story of finding himself in a position where, he's a former pastor too, finding himself in a position where it's like, we're in a mess, financially. I got to figure out a path forward. And he said the thing that we had come to this conclusion, we got to make good decisions, and that sounds real simple, but if you start stacking good decisions, you start seeing, okay, this is a cost that I don't need to be paying right now. I need to cancel this, or I need to, get this paid off, or I need to, you know what I mean? So you start, okay, that's one good decision. Now look at another one. Okay, now this is one good decision. For us, we realize these mobile home investments, they were not good decisions. So we got to get them solved and get them behind us. And, we're praising God. We closed, last week on the last one. And so that's now behind us. And so, I think that was one that's probably the most glaring for us of, learn.
So with that, what was the major difference between like your house on a foundation versus a mobile home? What was the main difference there that you said, that you found out at some point that it wasn't worth it to get into that as a business opportunity?
Well, people do it successfully. So I'm not saying it's not a good idea for somebody. For us, I think, we learned that that's not necessarily, we're going to have to learn a lot more before we feel real comfortable, taking that step again. Right. But I would say this, with a mobile home, you're very dependent on the park. And so that can be a factor, and if somebody walks in and you got the nicest home in the park, but you're the nicest home in the park, and so that can have a pretty significant impact. Plus, there's a lot that you don't control in that type of setting, as opposed to a house flip on land, and even a mobile home on land is different, completely different. And so I think there's just those type of factors that play in that, again, it's a matter of what do I have control over? What can I influence? What can I make a difference on? Where can I add value? In what ways can I add value? And in what ways am I limited in my ability to add value? Because when you run up against those, sometimes those are hard stops. And the only solution is a price reduction.
Right.
Right.
Very cool. Yeah. The reason I asked and dug more into that is my brother and I, when we first moved out of our folks' house, we bought a mobile home for like 10 grand cash.
Sure.
And when we ended up going both our separate ways, we both walked away 3 times what we put into it, which was like very interesting to see that. And that, it wasn't necessarily a goal for ours to get into like an investment mode.
Yes.
But like he went and did the same thing. Yeah. And so for him, like that is his next step into investing and having a place to live. For me, it was like, how can I get out of the parents' house? I'm sick and tired of paying them rent.
Yeah, right.
So how can I get my own house and do this? And it was very interesting because you're looking at prices are a lot lower in that realm of things. So things can be quicker, and they're smaller homes as well. Well, depending. There are definitely like some bigger double wides in there. But
which is interesting too. That was a learning thing for me. Like I didn't realize a double wide had 2 titles because there's one for each side of that. I was like, wow, that's weird. But, okay. But again, and that's one of the things I think that your listeners can take is that here we are doing the same thing. You win, I lose. Why? Well, there's a lot of pieces to that. One is the park. One is your price point. Another is how much you rehabbed, how much you put into it, what it cost you from point A to point B, and I think too, the market can dictate too. Like we happen to be in a market where it's a lot of mobile homes. and a lot for sale at that particular moment. So like, and again, it was like when we purchased them, we did all the comps, pulled all the comps, we're like, this is going to work. And then, the market just kind of dropped, and we're just in this place where it wasn't selling. And so again, like there's something to be said for, everybody's got to run their own race. And, somebody may come along and say, that's a bad idea. That's a bad idea. And yet you may be totally convinced in your head that it's the right thing. When that happens, I think you need to be cautious and careful, but there is a place where when you settle in and you become convinced, hey, this is the shot that I should shoot. I think again, there's a really great book, by the way. I just went through it. Like many people have heard of Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. But he's written there's another one called Built to Last. There's another one, How the Mighty Have Fallen. And there's kind of like this series that they put together. And I think one of the last ones is called Great by Choice. And I had never heard about it. I don't know, maybe you guys have seen it, but I just was like, I'm listening to this book, but man, there's so much in there that's so valuable, I think, for an entrepreneur who's getting started and trying to figure it out. And one of the concepts is fire bullets and fire cannonballs. Like when you shoot a bullet, it's like this lower risk. It's a smaller investment. It's, you're not putting all in. And then once you test that and you can show repeatedly you're hitting the target with that, then you put all your, this big effort into blowing something away. And one of the mistakes that we made with that mobile home was we stepped into one and stepped immediately into the second one before we'd sold the first one. And that looking back, like I would have saved myself a ton if I had been a little bit slower and been more patient, being like, okay, do the first one, make sure it works, then do the second one. So looking back, of course, you can see these things 2020, but I think that book helps paint that picture so you can see, okay, how do we make sure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that, I mean, if I were to go and do it again, I would probably have a failing point because my brother and I both in the trades, we went over the top. Like we lived there, and so it's one of these, a trailer from like '89, and it's got $7,000 worth of granite countertops in there because I was on a job where they were throwing it away. Yes. So it's one of those one-off situations.
That's an advantage, right?
Mm-hmm.
You knew, I mean, whether you knew it or not, but you did have that advantage.
Right. Yep.
And the other thing too, this is one of the things I love about real estate is the people who moved into those mobile homes got so much value. It was on our dime, but when at the end of the day, they got something good, and I'm excited for them that they were able to have that.
Yeah.
And in your situation, somebody that walked into there and they're expecting an '89 trailer, and they walk in, and holy cow, this is a palace. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Very cool.
Where are you? I don't mean to like point at where you're failing, but where are you failing today, and how are you going through it?
Well, so for me, by the way, it's a good question. It's not a comfortable one, but it's a good one. And I would say that the biggest risk to your business is always you. And so where am I failing? Well, one of the things that I'm learning is, when you are offering investments to the world, this is a Robert Kiyosaki quote, but every entrepreneur needs to be good in sales, right? And in that space, I feel like that's an area where I'm just like, I don't know anything. I am just like struggling with that. And the reality is, in a situation like this where you have a project that you're trying to work on, and for us, we do that work. We go do due diligence. For example, we have a mobile or a self-storage facility and we offered a deal to our investors to be able to join us in a project in a self-storage facility. And this particular project was in Georgia, and so I drove down. We did the due diligence. I've known the operator for a number of years. Excellent operator, does a good job. And the cool thing was, it was what's called a 506B syndication, which means I can have non-accredited investors in it, which is where my heart is. And so we presented that deal to our investors. Well, that's a whole learning curve, and again, by now we've gotten our heads around it, but you've got to create that slide deck that tells that story and make sure all those numbers are correct. Then you need to present that to your investors so that they can have a chance to see and hear the story. And then you get done with that, and nobody's saying, "Hey, I'm going to send you $100,000." So you're like, now what? So now, you got this $500,000 you need to raise or whatever it is, and you've got to figure that out. And so for me, that was this learning curve of, I don't really even know how to do that. And so it began this whole process of, okay, I need to start reading books on sales and figure out, how do you present your offerings, and how do you, and again, like, sales is this word that is, sometimes feels like used car type, but it's really noble in the sense of when you're helping people make decisions that they want to make on projects that they want to invest in, but just have the fears that are naturally a part of that. And you can help them to see those or evaluate those. And again, I think that's one of the things that your job is, as a person who's selling something to somebody, is your job is to help lay out the landscape. What is this deal? What does it offer? What's the upside? What are the risks? And is that, to the best of your ability, you're trying to help that person, because everybody's different and everybody has different needs. So you're trying to help them figure out, like, where does this deal fit for you in your overall goals, what you're trying to accomplish, and, will it help you try to get there? So I think back to your question, like, where am I failing? I think, and again, because of the way we would describe all this, I would say where I'm learning is in that realm, and we're firm believers that one of the tasks for us is to figure out what our investors need and then go seek to find that, to provide that for them. But once you do, then you're at this moment. Now what? And you've got to go out and find those investors that fit for that project. And the more, it's interesting, but the more calls I make, the more people I find, that it fits for. And those calls don't make themselves. And, those people aren't just waiting by the phone. They're, you're stepping into their lives when they're busy and they've got a lot going on. And so, there's a whole world of figuring out a path to be of value, to the people that you're serving, which again is the center point of entrepreneurship anyway.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Love that.
The old Zig Ziglar quote, right? You can have anything you want in life if you help enough other people get what they want.
Yeah. Yeah. Add value first is one of the things that we hold ourselves accountable to in our mastermind. We run through that every Tuesday morning. And when that hits, like, you can see everyone's head. Yep. Add value first.
That's good.
Yeah. Sales is service.
Yes.
It's key.
Great quote.
Key. Yeah, so we can run through the rest of our questions. I know we've already dove through a couple of them. The ones that I had noted, we actually hit some of those along the story, which is perfect. I love having it naturally go that way. I would love to hear about this is similar to Jonathan's question, but I want to hear about a creative solution that you had to put together for something that you faced within your business. Maybe that was pulling someone in temporarily, bridging the gap on a certain deal, but would just love to hear about a creative win in your journey.
Yeah, there's a few that come to mind, but I think one that is current. We have those properties I mentioned in Arizona, and we're looking at just the overall state of those properties, and you're always, one of the tasks that you have as a operator is, how do I maximize this property? And so, to your point, what we have identified is that there's a potential that we could add an additional dwelling unit to one of the properties. And so that's a whole thing, right? You got to get, all of your, working on the construction side, you got to get your permits and the OKs and, put your budgets together and evaluate, in our particular situation, we have a completed garage that could be converted, we think. But then you got to ask, are the footings there, right? And is the structure solid enough? And what do you have to do to shore that up if it's not? How do you get your connections from your, water and sewer and, all of that? So there's this learning curve for us in that space, but it has the potential to be a very significant win for our investors. We have another property out there because they've changed the laws related to ADUs, additional dwelling units, if you're familiar with that term. But and in our particular location, you can add additional dwelling units onto those existing properties. And so that property is one that we've identified. There's another one in which the house sits on that lot. The house sits to the right and front of the lot, and it's a pretty deep lot. So there's lots of room for a driveway to go to the back, and you could add another unit in the back. So, okay, that's something that we're now exploring. Well, what would that look like? And how could we build a unit? And in the end, that one would probably be about 400 square feet. So, okay, well, how do you build that? So that's right now, that's probably our biggest spot of like, okay, we got to find a creative solution to this. Because the task is the increasing the revenue, right? Through the opportunity for the investors to benefit.
Yep. Love it.
That's good. Yeah. Just to encourage you a little bit. Just for context, I've never met Scott before today. And very first thing I noticed when I met you is just a very clear intention to get to know the people that were in front of you. Even in a group setting where there's multiple people, like I still felt like you took the time to like really just make sure every person was seen. And I think that's one of the most powerful aspects of sales. I really draw from the book Never Split the Difference.
Yeah, sure.
And the book talks, their main point is about tactical empathy and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And I think you do that very, very well. That was actually, even before knowing about the sales aspect that you were kind of diving into and such, I was curious to know, like, if that skill is something that you've kind of always been good at, making people feel seen, or if that's something you've developed over the years, or if that's just like a gift from God that was that's just how you are.
Well, that's so interesting that you bring that up. There's always these personality tests, right, that you can take and try to figure out exactly what are my skill sets and what am I kind of bent toward. The Strengths Finder, Clifton Strengths Finder, I think it's called now. They give you a top 5, and one of my top 5 is called woo, which is the idea that you can kind of winning others over, and so that kind of stuck out to me. That was years ago that I took that test. So I do think that there is some aspect of that's built in, that you just kind of, I was the youngest kid in the family. And so maybe there's some where you just, always kind of aware of everybody, because you're just the kid and that everybody's aware of you, to a degree. And I think that there's probably some things that, we just don't know that we grew up with that are kind of innate. But I would also say, just like the kid who's got natural talent as a golfer or a baseball player or whatever, you can hone those skills. You can get better. And, like, I'm on my third time through How to Win Friends and Influence People. And by the way, if you haven't read that book, read that book. It is so good of just teaching you, to be interesting, be interested, So I think that there's just some really significant things. And again, all of these things are built out of the root of what we all hold with love God, love people, golden rule stuff, treat others the way you want to be treated. And there's a root to all of that that's just foundational to who we are trying to be as people that I think automatically drives some of that. But I also do think that there is that aspect that, we can learn some of those things and learn to hone our way of thinking. And again, it's not to be manipulative, but it's truly to love people. Like I want to know, I want to understand, I want to have, because again, if you're doing the sales work as service, like you described, which I love that phrase, you have to know. You have to know as much as you possibly can about their situation, because if you don't, then you run these risks of, offering them something that's not good for them, or that it's an outsized risk, for where they are.
Yeah.
Or walking away, I would say, walking away from their scenario, knowing that your product can serve them and you didn't do a good enough job to like let them know that that's actually what they need. And you have to kind of live with that, especially if they're in, like, I do remodeling. And so I walk into scenarios where people are missing cabinet doors and they got holes in the wall and holes in the floors. And it's not a good scenario. And they don't know what it is to have a better scenario. And it's your job to help them understand their case and how they can have a better life because of what you can provide.
When you were talking about that, another thing that struck me is you're an honest guy. You're going to do good work. You're going to deliver on what your deal was for them. And the next guy might not, right? So if we don't maximize our capacity to help people with delivering on, what we promised and giving them and we've all seen it, like, and this was another phrase, I learned from the real estate guys, but the pain of low quality far outlasts the pleasure of low price. And so that's a learning curve, though. You have to teach that and help your customer understand, this is where, this situation is, and here's what we can do for you. And again, and so much of it comes from the listening side. When you sit down and you're able to help that person talk out what they are looking for, then it's much easier to help them see, what the right solution is going forward. And I think it's super helpful when, you're the solution, right? So it's good.
Yeah, that's really good.
You want to say that quote one more time about the pain of low quality? I love that.
The pain of low quality. This was, I heard Robert Helms say this, but it like the minute he said it, I knew it. And your dad and I had these discussions like tons of times because of the property management thing, and we'd experienced it. But the pain of low quality far outlasts the pleasure of low price.
So good.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Nathan, John, any other questions or topics you guys want to touch on?
No, but I think I might put that on my truck.
That would be great. Yes.
Love it.
That would be cool to see that on the side of a truck.
Yep.
I mean, everybody would be like, dang, that's wisdom right there. Right? Because I know when he said it, it just like so many specific memories come to mind of like, you know, I spent it twice because I didn't do it right,
Yeah.
you know?
And the second time was more expensive.
That's right. Yeah. So good.
That's good. Well, this has been a absolute pleasure to
Oh,
record
thanks.
with you. We'll run through these last things and then we'll wrap it up. But what are you currently excited about and working on?
Yeah. So, first of all, I just want to say again, you guys are just, I love this, what you guys are doing. And, you know, hearing more of each of your stories, like is just so exciting to me. You know, good men out doing good work and living good lives is just so cool. So what am I working on? So, we just wrapped up that oil and gas project, saw some just amazing things with that. You know, give me a call sometime and I'll tell you about that, but, it's for a different time, but, so that's cool. We're excited about that space and what we're doing there. You know, our development project in Austin is coming along. You know, and with our world, we have two spaces that we work in, and it's a type of investor. So there's a group that's called an accredited investor, and that's someone who has $1 million in net worth outside of their home, or they earn $200,000 a year and have earned it previous year and expecting to earn it in the years ahead. And so that's a pretty select group of people that fall into that category. But then there's the rest of us too, you know? And so in what we do with real estate or with real asset syndication, there's two primary, I mean, there's multiple, but there are two primary types of deals. Most deals are going to be either a 506C, which is only for accredited investors, but you can advertise. So you can put it out on Facebook, you can put it on your website, whatever. Then there's the 506B, which allows you to have up to 35 non-accredited investors in your deal, but you can't advertise. So anybody who wants to know what we're up to when we're doing a 506B offering needs to be in our network already. We need to have the legal term is a pre-existing substantive relationship. It's SEC requirements. And so, you know, what we say is join our mailing list. We have what we call the Investor Mentoring Club. And it's not like, you know, it doesn't require dues or anything. It's basically you receive our emails and are up to date on what we're up to. And we try to provide education that's helpful, you know, resources and contacts that are helpful, and, you know, suggestions for reading, and, you know, all kinds of different aspects where we try to add value up first, right? Like you're supposed to. But then also those deals provide opportunity. So, for example, the project that we did in Arizona, that was a 506B. So we bought 10 single-family homes there. It's going great. And we've got some pastors and missionaries that are in that project. The self-storage facility project that we did, you know, great opportunity. We've got 10 pastors, missionaries in that project. But again, it wasn't something that we could advertise. So it's on our website, but it's behind a code that if you don't have the code, you can't get access to it. And so, you know, for that, as far as for, you know, your audience, if they want to know more about what we're doing or find out what the opportunities are that they might have access to, you know, obviously if you're an accredited investor, you should go to the website, you can see. But if you're not accredited and want to be on the mailing list, then you can just sign up and let us know, and then we'll put you on the mailing list. And so that leads to what we're working on. One project that we have that's active is the development project in Austin. And so we're building modularly built homes. So they're not, and that's not mobile homes. Okay. So the modular construction space is different in that it's a solid, well-built home that's just built in a factory and then craned into position. And they're, you know, all kinds of designs, and but they're nice homes. And so we're currently doing that project in Austin, and you know, there's a structure for preferred returns for our investors there, and they're pretty strong. So that's one that accredited investors can check out. Another one that that's active is a private commercial lending fund. It's in our website. It's called the Income House. And basically what you are doing is you are in, again, this is for accredited investors, but you put in your capital, and then the team that I'm working with, which is Aspen Funds, they take that capital and they deploy it to commercial real estate opportunities. So if that's a self-storage facility, multifamily, it can be an industrial, a medical office, a mobile home park, triple net retail space, and only in those places where there's not distressed. So these are not borrowers that are just, hey, I got to have this capital or I'm going to die. It's more, hey, we'd like to do this expansion, and it's going to produce an X number of dollars in return, and the capital will help us to, nail that and help to create. And we've got capital already. So it's just a wise business move for them. So that's where those loans come from. And they also only go to projects in which Aspen, the managing partner, could take over if there was a problem. So they're structured in such a way to where if there's an issue, then they can step in, correct it, still end up with with the good returns. And again, it's not that there's no risk, but you are farther down the capital stack. Typically, when you come into a syndication, you're coming at common equity, which is the top tier. So that gives you the upside if things go well, but also is the first to go if there's a problem. And so this falls into what's called the preferred equity or the mezzanine debt, which is farther down in the capital stack and protected by that deeper tranche of equity that's in the property. So anyway, as far as a risk-adjusted return, produces like 8 to 12%. It can be compounded. And so very excited about that project because it's, you talk about de-risking. The property itself provides some of that de-risking. Aspen's team, great operators, just a huge track record. They've distributed over $100 million to investors from returns on capital. And so great team to work with. And so we're very excited about working with them. And we do have some 506B offerings that we're working on. I mentioned that friend of ours in Memphis, and we've stayed friends, and we're looking at some projects together going forward. So I'm very excited about that. But again, you can't say too much about that because you need to kind of be in our network to kind of hear what we're up to. So, again, if you'd like to hear more about what we're doing in that particular space, Scott at commongracecapital.com. You can go to our website, commongracecapital.com, and see, what we're up to and get access and up to date on things there.
Perfect. That was the next one. How do they get in contact? But it sounds like website. Is there any socials besides website and email?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're on Instagram and Facebook. We've got pages there, and of course LinkedIn. We've got a page there at Common Grace Capital, and then also I'm on LinkedIn as well, and love to connect with you there. So yeah, if there's any way that we can help, we'd love to be a part of it. Again, our goal, because we know that space and ministry space, and some of that background too, of when you're there in that ministry world, it too. But when you are there, you're serving and your head is down into the work that you're called to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can find that path that produces that little bit extra each month, it can provide, what feels like a game-changing difference.
Yeah.
We're a family of 10, right? So if I'm going to McDonald's, $100, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's real.
Yeah.
But if I've got cash flow of $100 a month in a property, well, then I can swing that.
Mm-hmm.
And it can, the word that comes to my mind and that we hope to build, for our investors is that dignity, right? Of like, one of the things I know about pastors, missionaries is they hate the feeling of, most of them, of like feeling like they are being given these things. I mean, there is that sense, which again, Jesus didn't have a place to lay his head. And so you understand, and he received and was willing to receive. And you want that. And you want to be okay with that. But you also want to work hard and you want to, see your wise investments produce something.
Yeah.
Paul was a tent maker. That always struck me, especially I got into this. Well, hey, we're both providing housing. That's good, But he did that so that he wouldn't be a burden. And I think a lot of people that are in ministry have that thought of, I don't want to be a burden. There's no way I want to do that. I want to figure out a path. And so what our hope is, and again, it's one of the unique things about a real asset investment is very often it can provide cash flow that you can choose to live off of if you want. If you want to just, stick it back in or whatever, you can do that. But it can provide cash flow, but then also build that nest egg to where your equity is growing as well. And so sometimes even if you use some of that to live on, which is exactly what we did, we still had that nest egg growing in the background as well. So that's one of the benefits of it, and where our heart is, and we just hope we can, kids, again, and I know, talking to you guys, I know you're not just out to make a dollar, you're out to make a difference. And so looking for ways we can make that happen.
Yeah.
I love it. Thanks for adding some color to the mission as well.
Yeah, thanks.
So we were talking about earlier, like the manager matters, or the person that you're giving your money to matters.
Yeah.
So, hey, what's the mission? Who's this person? That's part of the reason for the podcast, and excited to have had you on. So to close, what's the last key piece of advice that you'd leave our audience with? It could be something we talked about or something we didn't touch on today.
I would say it's, from my perspective, own your responsibility to figure it out. Meaning, why am I here? What am I here to do? And again, you guys kind of focus on entrepreneurs, right? To a degree.
Yeah.
There's a great book called The Social Entrepreneur. And in the front part of that book, they talk about what kind of entrepreneur are you and try to help you to identify what that is. So I would say figure that piece out, and then own that there is a path that you have to figure out to get there, right? Like that isn't going to come, like lightning striking your brain, probably. It's going to come through this iterative process of taking a step, figuring it out, and constantly being aware. There's an interesting section in Proverbs, and it says, prudent man gives thought to his ways. And then there's a corresponding line that's farther down in that, use a Bible word, pericope, that little section. And the corresponding, so the first one is a prudent man gives thought to his ways, but then the corresponding one is a prudent man gives thought to his steps. And so he's thinking, where's this going to take me? What direction do I need to put my next footfall to get there?
Direction, not perfection.
Yeah.
What I heard from that.
That's good. Very good.
Love it. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to the IntentionALL podcast. This has been an interview with Scott Florida, bringing you real asset opportunities. Go out there today and live intentionally. Hey guys, thanks for watching. This is Aaron DJ here, the founder of IntentionALL. On IntentionALL, we focus on building businesses, entrepreneurship, and investing without losing everything else that matters. I want to take a quick second to acknowledge someone I work closely with. The audio and the video that you heard in this episode was produced by Alex Sikma, and beyond that, he hosts a podcast called Disruption. Disruption is a Christian-based show that explores theology, philosophy, and how to think through a biblical lens. If that kind of content resonates with you, I genuinely think that you'd get value from his work. You can find Disruption on all platforms, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and I'll drop the link below.